There we go. It should be on the agenda slide now. So we'll walk through the history of LED. We'll talk about CCT tunable products, PoE lighting, and the newest emerging trend that we're seeing, which is LiFi. And then at the end, we'll get through some frequently asked questions. So our story, for anyone who doesn't know us, I see there's quite a few people on this one today. So for anyone who doesn't know us, we are a manufacturer's rep agency here at Catalyst Sales and Marketing. And what we do is we connect global manufacturers to local markets, and ultimately we deliver on the commitments and the goals of our manufacturers here in Atlantic Canada. So to understand where we're going with LED, the first thing I want to do is just touch on where we've been. So just a quick history on LED, an overarching history on LED. Here's a timeline. So, we can go all the way back to 1907, and that's when Henry Round first discovered electroluminescence, and that was really the birth of everything we have today. It was in 1927 that the first LED was invented by Russian scientist Oleg Lozev, and it wasn't until about 10 years later till anything really happened with that. And it wasn't until about the 50s that we really started seeing developments with LEDs and substrates that we actually use today in the manufacturing of LEDs. So if you look at gallium arsenide or even gallium nitride, which is used in all the LED substrates on current products, the development on that didn't really start happening until the 50s. And then in 1962, it was Nick Holonyak working for General Electric who invented the first visible light spectrum LED in the red side of the spectrum. And then really what got us here in the industry to where we're at today and the potential that we have realized and the potential we have ahead of us was in 1993. It was a Japanese researcher, Tsuji Nakamura, who created the first high brightness blue LED. And then with the combination of phosphors over that, that gives us the high powered LEDs we're using today. And Tsuji actually worked for Nichia, which is a diode manufacturer. For anyone familiar with some of the inner workings of fixtures, Nichia is still one of the dominant manufacturer of LEDs and diodes in general in the market today. And actually in 2014, Tsuji won a Nobel Prize, him and his team, for the development of that LED in 1993. And then a benchmark for all of us, 2008, Audi was the first car manufacturer to put LEDs into their automobile, which gave us the beautiful R8, which is Iron Man's car, of course, Robert Downey Jr.'s car. So a huge benchmark there in 2008. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today. And then I just want to kind of touch on the efficiencies of LED kind of in the modern era. So when I started selling LED fixtures back in 2009, 2010, and I'm sure some of us can remember that, we were selling light fixtures around 40 lumens per watt. That was kind of the benchmark at the time, which was great. There was tons of opportunities, rebates were coming into play, and the market really started to take off here in Atlantic Canada. And then where we're at currently with the growth and advent with that linear efficacy, we'll see products in the 130 to 150 lumen per watt range here in 2020. And this is real world. So this graph is real world, what we're actually seeing in fixtures. Interestingly, the theoretical potential for lumen per watt or efficacy, we're up in the 600 lumens per watt. That's a theoretical limit. And practically where we're seeing tests right now, I know Cree released a report in the last week, I think it was, that they have a fixture now in testing that will probably still be years out before you see it on the marketplace, but they're at 303 lumens per watt on some prototype fixtures. So that's kind of where we've gone in that linear growth and efficacy. And the thing I always like to highlight on this graph is for the naysayers who think, okay, well, once we replace a traditional incandescent halogen or fluorescent source with LED, we've lost that retrofit business, sorry, the repeat business, right? Where those fixtures and lamps typically would have failed. But the nice thing is those 40 lumen per watt fixtures that we were selling back in 2009, 2010 now have a retrofit opportunity for newer efficiency LED fixtures. And I know there's been several jobs and lamp jobs that have swapped LED for LED. So that's the real value in this slide, is just being aware that there is potential there with the increase in efficiencies to retrofit LED for LED. And here's a roadmap quickly of where we're at with the chips themselves. So what we're seeing in the manufacturing of these products, and there's a few versions, and one I just want to touch on that kind of plays into the CCT controllable aspects that we're going to talk about quickly, or sorry, shortly. So the first is SMD, our surface mount diodes. These would go directly on your printed circuit boards. And then you get into your colored LEDs, so red, green, blue, any color that would make sense for the application of lighting. Then what we're seeing some real growth on right now in products making it to market in the electrical industry are the RGBW series of LEDs. So these would contain a red, a green, and a blue diode, as well as a white diode, and this would allow you to do color selection through some form of control. The next product that we'll hear more and more about, and that is getting more widely deployed within fixtures, is what's known as flip chip. So this takes the, excuse me one second. Sorry, this takes the traditional substrate, inverts is the substrate on the bottom side, and it has its contacts on the bottom side. So it does a lot better for heat dissipation on the diodes, allowing for theoretical higher lumen efficacy. So you'll see more of this flip chip product coming in the market in the next few years. And then probably for most of us who have sold LED in this industry, what has become common is the cob or the chip on board, and you're seeing a few examples here, the red copper base, as well as the MSA cob, which is all the way up to, on the market right now, 170 lumens per watt in some fixtures. And this specifically is the diode that I wanted to talk about. This is a cob or a chip on board, but you can see just visually looking at this, it has two diode types. It would have a cool white and a warm white. You're seeing those yellow phosphors over top, and you can see the contacts on it. You've got your cool positive input and your warm positive negative input, and this is what allows us to do CCT, or color temperature selectable or controllable, by blending those light sources. Just like we do with RGB diodes to create any color, we can do the same thing with color temperature. And the last piece to this story is going to be the modules. So we've got all this great development in efficacy, we've got all this great development in efficiency and the diodes themselves and controllability of the diodes, but ultimately we need a way to control it. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the products and the protocols that allow this to happen. So in the middle of the screen here, let me just see if my laser pointer works. Hopefully it does. But these are actually some examples of chips. These are made by a manufacturer out of China, but these chips are only about the size of your thumbnail and not much thicker. And these can be integrated directly into any lamp or any fixture. And within those chips, you can really select your protocols. So the most common ones we probably see are Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Waves probably up there for most people on the residential side. But we can also integrate commercial controls like BACnet, Modbus, DALI, and you're seeing some other control options. So that kind of quickly gives us the history of LED, the landscape of the efficiencies, the diodes themselves, and some control options for the products. So when we pair all those things together, what are we really going to do to the fixtures and the lamps to add value? And one which some people may have heard of, it's been on the market for a while, it hasn't been heavily adopted, but it's the tunable aspect, or the controllable aspect, or some manufacturers will call it human-centric lighting. So CCT controllable. And the first thing I really want to touch on here is, the why. Why is this interesting to us as an industry, and what potential does it bring the marketplace? Why are we going to go out and sell this thing? So we're going to take a quick trip back to high school physics and high school biology. So the first thing to answer the why is, why is color temperature described in Kelvin? So that's the first thing, because when we talk about CCT, or correlated color temperature, we always reference a Kelvin, a warm white, a cool light. And Kelvin is not a measurement of color. Kelvin is a measurement of temperature. It's the Celsius scale. It just starts at absolute zero, minus 273 degrees Celsius. So why do we do this? Well, we do it because our reference to light comes from the largest black body radiator that we have, which is the sun. And when we begin to heat a black body radiator, so if we look at a piece of black iron, if we look at a piece of carbon and we begin to heat that in an oven, you know, the first thing it starts to do is it starts to glow visible light. And the warmer temperatures, or sorry, the lower temperatures irradiate a warmer light, your reds, your oranges, your lower Kelvin. So if we actually measure those colors based on the temperature that that black body radiator is heated to, then we get temperatures, say, in the 1800 Kelvin to 2400 Kelvin range, like a warm, traditional, or nostalgic light bulb. And as we continue to heat it, then we start to get you know, yellow, we start to get white hot, and ultimately we start to get blue, ultraviolet colors, and those are your cooler color temperatures. So that's why we use Kelvin to describe color, but that's the physics side of it. So practically, what's the value in it for us as individuals and anyone looking to install these type of fixtures? Well, that comes down to the biology. So, you know, in this background here, we're seeing a great representation of the sun in the sky. So we're seeing, you know, sunrise here, peaking at noon, and then we're seeing sunset. Well, biologically, every trigger that most animals on this planet have is in some way related to sunset, sunrise. So if we remember from biology, in our eyes, we've got our rod cells, we've got our cone cells, which handle color and night vision. So your scotopic and your photopic vision. Well, we also have another cell called the ganglion cell, which triggers your circadian rhythm. And that's what we're really trying to simulate, and why we're trying to simulate it, because your circadian rhythm manages your serotonin for wakefulness, your cortisol for wakefulness, and your melatonin for your sleep cycle. So we're trying to simulate that. And those are the real drivers. And if we look at the value in a properly maintained circadian rhythm cycle, and most people have probably practically seen this in products they have in front of them right now. On your phone, your screen will warm in the evenings, your computer's color temperature will warm in the evenings if you wanted to. People are buying blue light blockers. So these are all related to the same circadian rhythm drivers. So some of them are, you know, maintain that normal sleep schedule. It's a higher productivity for people who have a good circadian cycle, improved memory, you know, healthier immune systems, better metabolism, happiness, you know, better mood, better vitamin D generation, better calcium absorption, and that regulation. We talked about your circadian regulation, and it can even help with seasonal effectiveness disorder or shift work syndrome disorder. So those are all the drivers. That's why we want to do it. So what does it look like practically deployed? Here's a prime example, which would be a hospital, right? Human-centric lighting used in a hospital, moving beyond just dimming. You could look at, from a practical application, patients' rooms, corridors, nurses' stations, and they would all get value out of CCT controllable. But one of the most common ones is definitely the patient health side, right? When you're trying to recover, we just looked at that driver's side. When you're trying to recover from whatever it may be, you know, this is practically what a patient's room could look like with CCT controllable integrated in. So you'd have some sort of astronomic clock, right, which would naturally simulate the sunset sunrise cycle. Additionally, you could get a standard on-off controller, say for the task lighting above the headboard, and then you could have a dimming / tuning controller for the space for the main ambient lighting. So practically, that's what the deployment could look like. More realistically, you probably wouldn't see the control in the room of the CCT. You would want to automatically simulate that with your main controller. And visually, what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. So at high noon on the far left-hand side here, you'll see, you know, the lights would be tuned to 5,500 Kelvin at lunchtime, and that's full on 100%, because there's two parts to this story. One is the shifting of color temperature. The other is the intensity of light. So high noon, we're at 5,500 Kelvin, full on 100%, and then as the sun begins to go down later in the day, these main lights would shift to 3800 Kelvin to match that outside lighting color temperature. We dim them down to 75%. And then last, right before sunset over here, we would have the color temperature set to 2400 Kelvin, dimmed down to 50%. And this would trigger that melatonin response that we're talking about to keep that natural sleep-wake cycle in tune. So that is CCT tunable in a nutshell from a driver and technology perspective. The next part is power over Ethernet lighting. Now, power over Ethernet is not a new technology. It's not a new concept. We've even seen a deployment or two here in the Nova Scotia market. But I do want to touch on power over Ethernet because it is a valuable segue into LiFi, which we'll talk about after. So power over Ethernet, so essentially it's lighting, it's control and power on a single cable. So this is exactly what your power system could look like for your commercial lighting deployment in this example. So you're getting away from all of your circuit wiring, you're getting away from all your breakers, and everything is controlled and powered on a single category 5, 6, 6A, whatever the standard for that space is, on a single cable. So the big advantages of PoE, and at first we'll just look at the wiring diagram. So here's a real world layout of a PoE lighting system. So you've got a category cable going into your fixture itself. So that's a low voltage wire. Those are all home run back to, in this case, a hub in the space. So your PoE driver gateway. Also, your inputs would be PoE. So your wall station controls, your wall switches, your aux sensors, your daylight sensors, these would all be category 5, 6, 6A back to your PoE gateway. That would tie back to a PoE switch in a server room and then ultimately tie into the server or the router to get these onto the cloud. So it looks very different than a traditional wiring system using AC power. And the big advantages of PoE are equipment without having to connect any AC power, so a lot easier to deploy. Reduced installation costs. I know this can be a bone of contention for some of us in the electrical side of the industry, but it is a product that's going to be deployed more widely, so we have to embrace it. And I know contractors who have done jobs are still able to run that through the electrical portion of the contract, but it is less labor to install low voltage cable than traditional electrical wiring. Installation safety, so you're not dealing with AC power, you're dealing with low voltage power, so there's the safety aspect. Data gathering, this is really when the system starts to shine, is on the data side. So this doesn't make sense as a comparison to a traditional non-controlled lighting deployment, but as soon as you want any level of control, this is where PoE starts to make sense. So the data gathering capabilities, both at the fixture level, but also at the sensor or input level. So the amount of data you can gain from these systems is phenomenal. And then really what you do with that data ties into the productivity enhancements for the space and responsive deployments, right? Being able to make adds, moves, and changes is as simple, especially if you look at something like a troffer or a downlight in a drop ceiling. So you get tons of flexibility in those responsive deployments. So where are we headed with PoE lighting? Oh, we've got some hands raised. Okay, I'm going to get to those at the end. Just stick with me so we stay on time. So PoE standards. This is kind of the advent of the IEEE extensions, and we've gone from AF, which was the original PoE Plus, to where we are today. So those fall under Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, and Type 4. And this is all I want to highlight here in 2017, Type 4. We're seeing on a 4-pair PoE cable, you're able to get almost 100 watts per fixture. With the increase in efficiency of LED, which we looked at earlier, that's a significant amount of potential on one Cat5 cable based on how efficient these interior light fixtures are. So that's where we're kind of headed. That's where the limits are now, and where these products make sense and what they're currently being deployed in are Ethernet extenders, point of sale kiosk systems, LED lighting systems, security access control systems, digital signage, smart clocks. We've seen them in switches, routers. Wireless access points are pretty common. PTZ cameras, and VoIP telephones. So last, and really what we all came here to see and what we all lost some sleep over last night because we were so excited to learn about is LiFi. If you haven't heard the term already, LiFi stands for lighting fidelity or lighting Wi-Fi. So just bear with me 1 second. So yeah, LiFi is a visual lighting communication. And what is it? It's wireless data from every single light bulb or every single light fixture in a space, interior or exterior. And if you haven't seen this yet, there's a great TED Talk by Haas. This was in 2011. Harold was championing the potential of LiFi technology. And I'll just read you a quote from his 2011 TED Talk. So all we need to do is fit a small microchip to every potential illumination device, and this would then combine two basic functionalities, illumination and wireless data transmission. In the future, we will not only have 14 billion light bulbs, we may have 14 billion LiFis deployed worldwide for a cleaner, greener, and even brighter future. So that's what Harold said in his 2011 TED Talk. And this is kind of where we're at today with the technology itself. So how does it work, right? How does it work? We've got 14 million light bulbs out there. How do those become a gateway for wireless communication? Well, the beautiful thing, you know, when we go back to the history of LED, is it is a solid state device. It is a diode, and it can be switched at a very rapid speed. So the way LiFi would work in theory is quite simple. You have a transmitter and receiver in a device like your phone. You probably already see these light sensors on your phone now, which are used to gather information for your camera flash, for example. So you would have a transmitter, a receiver in the visible light spectrum, and then you would have your light source itself that would transmit in the visible light spectrum, and either the receiver would be built into this light fixture or light bulb, or you would have a separate receiving device for the space. So that's how it works in its simplest form. And this is what a wiring diagram would look like for a LiFi deployment. So an LED will flicker light at an extremely high speed that goes undetected to the human eye. So because we can switch these diodes so rapidly, we could switch them, say, at 10,000 times per second, which would be imperceptible to the human eye. So we would use that frequency of visible light flashing to send communication through the light. A photodetector will pick this up easily. In the next step, it would convert the received signal into electrical current to provide the ultra high speed that we're talking about. So in this wiring example, you know, you've got your cloud, your internet router here. You've got whatever content you're trying to send. Now you have a lamp driver. This is shown as an external component. This could be integral to the lamp or the fixture itself, or it could be done from a main driver. Then you have a photodetector, either, you know, third party, so tied in through USB, or ultimately once LiFi gains traction, the photodetector would be built directly into the devices like your laptops, your iPads, your phone. Processing would also be included in there, and then of course you would receive the data. So just like Wi-Fi does it through radio waves, LiFi would do it through visible light. So what are the big advantages of LiFi? One is definitely speed. So for anyone who's been working from their home office over these last 2, 3, I can't even keep track now, 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we've probably noticed some intermittent issues. I know internally we as a team have noticed some intermittent issues with Wi-Fi and the speed of Wi-Fi, especially getting in webinars and these video conferencing apps. So the speed is significantly faster than Wi-Fi. You know, 5G as a new protocol for wireless tops out at 10 gigabytes per second, where LiFi can boast speeds up to 224 gigabits per second. So that's 100 times faster than currently achievable speeds. Next one is security. You know, I'm sure we've all read in the news, Zoom being hacked now, not that it's related specifically to this, or people having concerns about their internet being hacked. I'm sure half the people on this webinar have a piece of tape over their camera currently. So anyone with security concerns, if you want to keep somebody out of your network, it's as simple as closing the blind, because you have to be within range of the building's lighting system to actually pick up the data. Health, so there is a big health aspect, especially, we talk about 5G and some of the anecdotal evidence out there that cell phones, when used too close to the head or other parts of the body, who knows, may have some impacts on cancer. So health is not a concern because LiFi works entirely within the visible light spectrum. This is the same light when you walk outside or stand under your light source today. So unlike radio waves used in RF or wireless communications, it doesn't fall susceptible to those issues. And then sensitive areas, so places like nuclear power plants, airplanes, anywhere else you can think of where traditional RF may be an issue, it's better for that. And then power. So LiFi aims to combat inefficient power consumption, drawing no more power than an LED light bulb. So, with RF, the further you want it to go, the more you boost it. With lighting, you only ever have to use the exact amount of visible light you need for the space, or less in other cases, to transmit the signal. So just to finish up, current products. So as much as Harold Haas talked about this as a potential marketplace in 2011, there's actual products on the market today, and here's two examples of them. So Signify has a product called True LiFi and OLED-Com in the top right corner here. Let me just highlight it right here. It just launched this product at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2020. So these are products readily available today. There's been flights that have run with some international carriers that have LiFi deployed. But you can see here in the Signify product, so the light fixture itself does the transmission. Here's an add-in receiver to receive the communication back. And then here's that dongle I referenced earlier, that right now it would have to be a third-party dongle because you don't have LiFi transceivers built into any equipment, but you could do it through these means currently. What's the market look like for us? As much as we're all concerned that PoE might take away a piece of our market share, LiFi offers us huge opportunities in the electrical space. So here's a few news articles. I'd encourage you to go Google it and do your own research. But right now they're predicting US almost $100 billion business by 2026, and that's at a compounded annual growth rate of 64%. So that's over double year-over-year type growth. So huge market potential. It is coming. We haven't seen it yet. Like a lot of technologies, the hype versus the adoption curve typically are quite spread out. The hype is one thing, but seeing it adopted and deployed definitely at the local level here in Atlantic Canada tends to lag, but it's definitely a product we should be aware of. And we'll just finish up here. So